What is happening above our skies? UAP, also known as UFOs, are operating above the skies of America and within our military's restricted airspace. But what non-human intelligence is controlling these vehicles? From military pilots reporting sightings in the sky to average Americans recounting experiences of beings taking them from their bedrooms at night. Who or what are they? What do they want, and what are we to them? Let's find out. Hey everyone, I'm Matt Ford, and welcome to the Good Trouble Show. The UAP phenomenon has prompted all of us to ask important questions about what is occurring in our skies. One of the most pressing questions is who or what is behind them, and what do these visitors want from us? Today we have a guest you will want to hear from who has some thoughts on those questions. But first, please hit the subscribe and thumbs up buttons on YouTube. Leave a comment and let us know what you think about this episode. You can also find us on X at Good Trouble Show and everywhere else at The Good Trouble Show. You can also find us wherever you enjoy your podcasts. Search for The Good Trouble Show with Matt Ford. And as always, if you would like to chip in to help keep the lights on, you can become a Patreon member of The Good Trouble Show by going to www.patreon.com/The Good Trouble Show, and you can support our work. Today's guest is the host of the podcast Emergent, asking 4 questions about UAP. Who or what is visiting our world? What is the most probable explanation for their intent? What does it mean for humanity? And how should we respond? Here to dig into those questions, please welcome Reed Summers. Reed, how are you, sir?
Doing well, Matt. Thank you. Good to be here.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks for joining us. We've been chatting for a while about having you on the show, and you know how I found out about you. Interestingly enough, so I've known David Grush for quite some time, even before he was public. And I was asking him one day, who would be someone that maybe is not on my radar that would be a really great guest, and he immediately brought your name up. He's like, you got to get this Reed guy on. He's doing really amazing work. And so thanks for joining us. For the longest time, and this is kind of going back to what I was asking David about, I've really kind of avoided the whole thing of who is flying the craft or what is flying the craft. I was really kind of focusing on really just the nuts and bolts of it, because I really thought that the NHI question, that was like, it was really kind of too much for people to handle. And I just wanted to focus on that aspect. And then a friend of mine that has worked the UAP topic in the government for a long time, he kind of called me out, and he said, who are you to decide, and he's talking to me, who are you to decide what people are or are not ready for? And when he said that, it really kind of took me aback, and it made me realize, you know what? People deserve the truth. I was basically, guilty of the same kind of gatekeeping that I've been critical of in terms of the government, thinking, people aren't ready, et cetera. So before we jump into the NHI aspect, I want to ask you, get your opinion on the latest news. What are your thoughts on this new select committee that Representative Luna and Comer announced?
I think it's promising. I think it needs to happen. There needs to be some kind of organized forum by which overclassified material can begin to get pried out of the hands of 3-letter agencies and other defense entities that have kept it from the public and from congressional oversight. I don't know how far it's going to be able to go with that effort. I doubt it's a silver bullet. No deus ex machina in this picture of UAP overclassification, right? So it's a question. I do think it's also, a bit of a risk going forward, the politicization of disclosure, mixing UAP disclosure with other political aims that are partisan in nature. So I am conscious of that as well, but I think it's a fantastic step.
I agree. When I saw some of the other things that were tied to it, like the Epstein files and COVID-19, all of those, in my opinion as well, I think they're pretty politically loaded. So I'm just kind of concerned that it will turn off the left side of the aisle because I do agree. It's like this has to stay bipartisan, because this is something that's been hidden, from multiple administrations, Republican, Democrat, and the minute you kind of weaponize the whole thing, I'm just concerned that will hinder progress, and the other party that's not in power will think, you know what, this is all just a bunch of BS. So I'm hopeful that
I've often shared my concern that disclosure is the divider, and that contact is the unifier. But if we can't identify the nature of the event taking place as contact with non-human intelligence, and if it's more about human secrecies, corrupt activity, illegality, all of that, which I don't doubt is also there, but if we center the controversy there, we lose the narrative, right? And we get off script, and therefore it becomes tit for tat, ways to take down your political rivals or to rewrite the narrative on history itself, the historiography of the whole thing. So some risk there.
Yeah, and one thing I've always kind of was hoping would be that former presidents, if they think that the current president is going to reveal this reality that we all know is true, that the former presidents would be concerned about their legacy, and they would step up, so that it can be some kind of joint thing, because I'm just worried the whole thing just kind of smacks of politicalization. I can't talk this morning, but I think what will be interesting will be like what Democrats jump on board, and I certainly hope that will be the case. Do you think that it will see folks from the left hop on board with this, or do you think it's just going to stay pretty much on the Trump side of things?
I hope so. When the UAP Disclosure Act was introduced, was it almost 2 years ago or 2 falls ago, and then reintroduced, it was a bipartisan effort. The Senate Select Committee, that effort, bipartisan to my knowledge. So it stayed in this kind of Goldilocks zone of highly apolitical and on behalf of the human interest, and even has the potential of getting outside the U.S. national security framing of the phenomenon into a world interest and world security framing. It has that international potential. So I hope the administration threads a careful course here and doesn't just puree this with every other Doge level government efficiency political imperative at the moment. So I think it's a tenuous moment. This is why this conversation is so important. We have to talk about the entities themselves, the non-human intelligence. The controversy belongs there as well, and often it doesn't. It's often human on human, and NHI are counted as either non-existent, neutral, observational, or beneficial. And those aren't all of the possibilities to explain the nature of the visitation.
And we'll dig into that here in a bit. But I'm curious, what is your sort of history or interest in UAPs? Where did all of that begin? For instance, did you or your family, had you had any experiences with the UAP phenomenon? And if so, have these experiences influenced you and your efforts regarding UAP disclosure and the things that you're up to now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, no, this has been a lifelong interest and involvement for me. Contact found me. I didn't find it, and that is the case for some out there, that for some reason this phenomenon comes and touches them, and they have a direct experience of it, and then they have to figure out what that means via the experience. And so it's kind of like experience before understanding, and understanding through experience, although not only. And in my case, though I had a set of pretty profound, intimate experiences of this phenomenon, I had to go figure out what it meant. I had to use my human capabilities of logic, caution, reason, and the observational ability I have to see what has NHI done in the world, what have they not done, to piece together my own assessment of the phenomenon. So it's been kind of up in my face. It's been a challenging journey. I've had kind of, for much of my life, an instinctual sense that this is what is out there, that we live in an ecosystem of life, or you might call it an exosystem of life, and that we are not a world apart. The universe gave rise to us and the Earth, and therefore it can give rise to other planetary bodies that might harbor other intelligent species. So that's just been an instinctual sense I've had. It's an intellectual sense I have had since high school, as we discover exoplanets and planets in the Goldilocks zone, planets with the biochemistry to potentially give rise to life. It just makes sense to me that this vast universe does not just contain us. And then I think also an intuitive sense, just a knowing that, is what I see on the surface of the world, human on human, human events of the day, is this all that's really going on in this world, or is there another layer of reality? And as I have, heard the statements made recently that NHI are interacting with humanity, biologics were part of that discovery. There is a secret arms race for technologies of non-Earth origin. As I hear these statements, it confirms the intuitive, the instinctual, and the intellectual all at once for me. That was kind of my early journey. My family, contact happened in my family. And my father was a special educator for individuals with multiple disabilities, multiple impairments, cognitive, visual, auditory, and speech. And over the course of his work with those individuals, he developed a powerful telepathic ability to receive communication. And that led ultimately and surprisingly and shockingly, right in the middle of my family, to him receiving a set of communications from a group of entities claiming to be non-human intelligence, literally a briefing by non-human intelligence. And, that was, for me, an intimate, close perspective on what it means to potentially be in contact, in communication, and to make a telepathic link, which I know is of chief interest right now out there, as people are waking up to the fact that, we may be capable of communication across distance and across minds, not just human to human, but extrasensory perception as relates to NHI. So, as that comes alive, man, I come alive because I went through that in my family. But, I think my father's experience, what my family went through, kind of activated three things for me. It activated a new sense of self in the world, like a new sense of human identity. I'm not only contained and barrierized in this human experience, that I'm actually a part of this ecosystem, as are we all. So that awareness was there for me from a very young age. And then my relationship with the world, which was always very strong, always had to get out there. I went into the post 9/11 Middle East the day after high school was over, hit the road, took off across the country, and ended up in Istanbul, and ultimately traveling 40 countries and learning languages and meeting people, and basically refounding myself on an experience versus a set of assumptions about what the world is. And, over the course of all those interactions, I got to talk to a lot of people about UFO, UAP, NHI, alien life. So, that's been kind of my bank of wisdom as to how to talk to the public about these topics, which is part of the purpose of my show, Emergent, to help the public think through this very enigmatic, confusing phenomenon and walk around 360 the full emergent set of qualities that might arise via NHI making contact with HI, human intelligence. So I think my time in the world was very key. And then just to conclude here, it was 2023, David Grush, congressional testimony, David Frazier, Ryan Graves. That was the wake-up call. That was the moment of inception regarding of my more immediate professional involvement in this field. And I was in Ukraine at the time, traveling through Europe for work. And I was in this essentially war zone, bunkerized at night in the hotel. And I thought to myself, I've known about this all my life, and I'm looking at this every day. How are the two connected? What, again, are the emergent new qualities of human life as it relates to potential contact with NHI? So that kind of woke me up. I left my career in media broadcasting and set my full sights and attention on this most important issue.
So this is something that you've been dealing with, if if I'm kind of framing it in the right way, really since a very young age.
That's right. Since the age of essentially 1.
Wow.
And
Okay.
my family story is being told in a very important production that's coming out. So I'll leave that full story
Sure.
for my father, my mother to tell, and others. But yeah, no, it was intimate. It was contact, and it instilled in me this sense. It kind of it put my life and what I thought the world should be, what I was going to do with my life, on a whole new spectrum of possibilities. It wasn't just go become a doctor, make money, acquire, and die happy and rich, right? It was reparameterized according to the possibility that we are undergoing interaction with non-human life, and we are a part of this ecosystem, and the need to understand the ecosystem and to understand their paradigm, because as far as I see it, we probably exist in the paradigm of them, those who are visiting the world, but they don't exist in our paradigm. And that's a problem. That could cause us to grossly misestimate or miscalculate the nature of them and their intent. So anyway, they were in my paradigm from the very earliest of ages. Yeah.
do you have any idea, for instance, I'm guessing there are probably tens of millions of people worldwide who have claimed to have seen UAP. I'm one of those people. They've shown up above my home 10 to 12 times, somewhere in that neighborhood. And a lot of these folks report interacting with beings. Do you have any idea how large that group is, how large that cohort? Any sort of thoughts or metrics on that?
I know there was a Roper poll done in the early 2000s. It was, I think, it was supported by Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs, two researchers into human NHI experiencers. And I think they estimated, the Roper poll, that, roughly 2 million Americans might have been exposed to the classical abduction experience. So if 2 million have been exposed to that, how many have been exposed to an actual sighting, right?
Right.
Or a close encounter on the ground or in the air? It could be a vast proportion of the human family. And, I think there also might be memory suppression at hand. It can be a traumatic experience for some. So some may have had the experience and not remember that they have. So it could be very widespread. And I think, if the phenomenon is that widespread, that begs us to question the nature of the visitation, the scope of it, and how deep it's penetrated into the human world.
Now, when you hear the term, or when we hear the term NHI, or non-human intelligence, to you, what does it signify? People mention various species or seeing different types of beings. Is NHI just kind of a catch-all for all of that? How would you describe NHI to someone that we'll just say, heard this for the first time on this show?
Sure. Well, back in the 80s and 90s, for those of us who were there, you'll remember the words extraterrestrial, or EBE even, extraterrestrial biological entity. And that was when the topic was very fringe, very sidelined, probably by design, by certain people involved who had that design. And, it expanded into maybe the early 2000s to be more alien. The alien meme became one very pervasive in the mainstream media, mass media. And more recently, we've seen this shift in language from UFO to UAP, and alien to NHI. And I understand the need for that shift, in that I think so much ridicule was generated around little green men, aliens from Mars, all this stuff, that the public, they couldn't treat the issue with sobriety and seriousness as it needed to be. And so maybe another phrase or acronym was needed to allow people to entertain the possibility, versus to be, to prevent the possibility from even entering their consciousness. So as I take NHI, non-human intelligence, I take that to mean the presence of sentient, non-human intelligences, who could be physical, non-physical, partially, both. There could be an interdimensional component, some surmise a crypto-terrestrial or co-evolving entity with humanity on Earth, many different theories. I vector in on a set of probabilities that I think must be urgently ruled in or ruled out. And I have kind of 3 urgent questions, which I try to answer through my work. Is there a physical alien visitor? 3 words. Are they physical? Are they alien? Are they a visitor? If we can answer that, that begins to bound the ever infinite range of possibilities, possible theories, into some urgent probabilities we need to deal with. Because if they are physical, that means they can employ physical impacts upon us, right? They can have real physical, biological, health, and medical effects on human beings. And if that's true, we need to deal with that and navigate that threshold. If they are alien, that means they're non-human. Some do surmise that they might be humans from the future, that they might be us evolved over millions of years. They left, they traversed time, space-time, and came back, etc. I don't think that's a very strong argument to make in light of all of the evidence and indications. But if they're non-human, that means they don't share our values, our belief structures. They will not share in common with us our default intent, whether it be for freedom, happiness, or even just survival. And so we have to deal with an alien intent, an alien interest, an alien set of values. And then again, if they're visitors not from here, that means they undertook some kind of programmatic form of contact to observe humanity, to traverse space and time to get here, and to interact with humanity for certain undisclosed ends. So a visitor means that we are being visited. We are the inhabitants, and they are those who are present from beyond. So we need to begin to ask some very urgent questions stemming from those 3.
Any idea, and I want to dig into a little bit more here in a second about the communication and intent, and how we're going to deal with this. But any idea how many species you think there may be? And is there any one particular that you're focusing on in your work?
So yeah, to back out for a second, I do think there are non-human, non-physical, non-human intelligence as well. So I wouldn't rule out the possibility that we are experiencing the effects of something that goes beyond the physical plane of existence. So I don't rule that out. Just want to make that clear, because when I start to talk about physical aliens, people think, oh, he doesn't know about the interdimensional aspect or the ultra-terrestrial aspect, and I do. So, but what I feel is true at this point, this is my assessment, is that we are dealing with a physical alien. And so now we go vector in on what is the point of contact? Let's talk about where NHI contact humanity intimately and most directly. And we talk about the experiencer accounts of non-consensual physical abduction, being removed from one's home or one's close, intimate space, and being taken aboard, whether it's craft or just simply outside of one's home. We start to get some reports via these firsthand observers. Now, I should caveat to say I don't believe all abduction reports to be authentic or accurate. Of course, there are other things at play. There is imagination, there's the cultural effect, the mimetic effect. Some of these accounts are done under hypnosis. Hypnosis has some inherent problems as well. So, I do feel that a small or moderate subset of these experiencer reports are translating to us accurate information regarding the entities. They are providing a characteristic profile of the entity and of the encounter that we can either choose to ignore or choose to consider further and go substantiate with better evidence, which is one of my passions and projects at the moment. But back to your question, imagine a scenario where there are half a dozen entities at play in the human Earth system, and they are here in maybe somewhat of a competitive sense. They have differing methods, but somewhat commensurate goals. And maybe they're willing to work with each other toward those shared goals, or maybe not. I don't think it's quite the rainbow that people make it of good and bad, or many people would say, well, there have to be good ones here.
Sure.
Right? If there's bad ones, there has to be good. I understand that kind of default thinking, but that is truly an unnecessary assumption to make. Not everything in the universe is necessarily here all at once, interacting with each other and us at the same time. So what I use a number of kind of analytical methods to get to some starting assessment of the NHI, their nature, their being, their motive and intent. One is the context, the spatial, the temporal, the circumstantial context into which they arrived, because I do feel there is a distinct 20th century visitation occurring, distinct from other theories about ancient contact that might have occurred. It's numerically present in the history. Going back into ancient records, you do not see the same kinds of reported encounters or craft qualitatively or quantitatively like you do now. So I think there is a unique 20th century event taking place. And I would say that there are certain signals humanity has put off that have led to this type of visitor, or these types of visitors, this half dozen, if we want to call it that, to be present in our world. I think the Second World War was one of them. The detonation of nuclear weapons was a second. Destruction of the natural environment, a third. And I think the rapid technological advances and the emergence of a global economic system is the fourth. And so that just begins to, prompt one to ask, so what kind of visitor responds to those signals?
Right.
Right? Are they here to rescue us? Are they here to teach us spirituality and religion and stop cancer and prevent the climate crisis? Or are they here to observe and ultimately involve themselves in some specific way due to that?
So in your opinion, or your kind of research work, you're saying that in terms of the abduction phenomenon, that is a sort of, it's changed significantly beginning with the 20th century, as opposed to sort of what was reported in the past. You do see sort of like a paradigm or sort of sea change with what we are experiencing now.
I mean, I think it's commonly understood in the record of ufology, of researching UFO incidents, that the number of craft, their worldwide distribution, the reported sightings and encounters by highly credible people seems to be a pre-war, war, and post-war reality, 20s, 30s, 40s. And, that record just does not carry into the late 19th century, 17th century. It's not to say that they might not have been there or observing or in the, again, the exosystem, because I don't think humanity has ever actually been isolated or alone. We have been in a state of mind of isolation, which is now breaking down, which is exciting and powerful and hopeful. But we have to begin to understand our exosystem by decoding the intent of the entities the first to arrive. If you take the native peoples analogy from human history in the colonial setting, those who were the first to arrive on the shores of North America did not represent the entirety of what was on the globe. They represented those specific interests that would seek that kind of visitation at that time for certain specific ends. And as we get deeper, we can talk about, what are the reported activities and behavior of NHI? What are the patterns and trends that we can observe over the last 100 years? One of your last questions, I don't focus on a single entity myself. I actually try not to speculate too much on, the grays are this, the mantids, the tall whites, the avians, the blues, the, Nordics. I think there's hazard in that for a number of reasons, not least of which is that in a lot of reported experiencer accounts, the non-human intelligence is capable of affecting either psychically or neurologically the perception of the human sensor, of the human being sensing them. They're able to change or comport their shape into some other shape. So to just say, oh, I know what the grays are, they're this, I think that's unwise to do. I think, and also the fog of war. It's just the evidence is not out there in the public yet. There's been so much secrecy and obfuscation. It's difficult to make firm, conclusive statements about one entity over the other. But I do think we can make conclusive statements and assessments of the entirety of the visitation event.
What are the sort of, let's pretend like I've never heard any of this before in terms of people being abducted or running into these beings. Walk us through what is kind of like a typical scenario, and also what is the sort of mode of communication if you were to generalize as far as how these entities communicate with folks. Just kind of walk us through what that looks like.
Sure. And I want to acknowledge the experiencer, the spectrum of experiences is broad, so it's not just one type only. And some have beneficial experiences. Some feel very safe with these entities. Some have very traumatic experiences and very harmful physical effects. So it is a spectrum. I think we need to take in the entirety of the spectrum and not also take things at face value only. Because again, even in the human sphere, we have medical technologies, we have drugs that can alter your perception to be positive or negative, right? We can activate our neurology and biochemistry in all sorts of different ways. There are syndromes at play in the human psyche, like Stockholm syndrome, where someone can perceive an abductor to be someone beneficial in their life. So I don't think we can just say, well, someone A said it was wonderful, and it was, or B said it was terrible, and it was. What is really going on in this encounter, I think, is what we need to get down to. And I think we can. So we'll save that for later. But yeah, a typical experience might be one of which an individual feels like there is another presence around them. That feeling of being watched or haunted, that you're not alone in your own room. And the individual might try to go to bed and feel afraid of going to bed. They might keep the lights on all night. They might try to sleep during the day. They might develop all these strategies to avoid this haunting feeling. They might have memories sneak through the barrier of memory suppression and screen memorization of being in bed, unable to move. They might have memories of seeing an entity or a luminous light pass through a solid surface, like a wall. They might experience trying to call out to the person sleeping next to them, and that individual either does not respond to their call or they literally cannot use their voice in this instance. They might encounter entities hovering, standing in windows, on the floor. The entities might not even be alien looking. They might take the shape of something the human psyche might write upon them as something more ontologically acceptable, like an owl, right? Or some other kind of familiar entity in the human experience. If memory allows, the individual might remember being transited out of their bed, floating. They might remember passing through a solid surface like their wall. They might remember being on board a craft in something close or akin to a medical examination room, on a table with entities standing over them, brilliant bright lights. They may experience either being tremendously terrified or being strangely calm. Both experiences are shared. These entities, variety of shapes and forms, some tall, some short. A lot of people have observed what they would term the gray alien, this 3 to 4 foot high, leathery gray skinned entity with big black eyes, who perform what seems to be more menial tasks and preparatory tasks. And then other taller entities, some might relay that as a tall gray entity or a mantid entity, stepping in to actually enact the procedure and to engage telepathically in communication. And that communication is instantaneous reception and understanding without language, presumably. I've not had this experience myself, so I can't directly say, but there are instances of individuals. God, now it cones out into something much broader field to explore. Sure. But I'll pause there.
Well, is there sort of like a typical experience with, let's say, a short gray versus a tall, like the preponderance of experiences? I'm just making this up, but people report negative experiences with a short gray versus the majority of people report a positive experience with a tall. Is there any sort of correlation at all between sort of species and what people's experiences tend to be in terms of positive or negative?
Great question. I mean, this is the citizen ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, that we should be doing and should have been doing if there wasn't so much ridicule. And I invite people who are direct experiencers to come out and relay the story. I've heard some unbelievable stories over many, many years that corroborate one another. And you can tell in the individual's retelling, this is a conscious memory. This was not regressed. This was not a dream sequence. And this impacted them profoundly. Whether you think they are accurately remembering it or not, they had an experience that had a life-altering effect, like major life-altering. Right. So I respect that. I think people do recount more negative experiences with beings that they describe as the grays, the mantids, the reptilians, and more positive experiences with the tall whites, the Nordics, the blues. Again, if I were taking you into my medical system for examination, organ extraction, forced impregnation, etc., whatever these entities are doing, I would probably want to have you go into the outpatient room and go meet some really nice character who shakes your hand and says, "You did a great job. You're special. You're one of the good ones. You're going to work with us. We need you." Right? And so if you had a good experience at the end of a potential memory you can't even recover of a terrible one, that's a problem. So I mean, it's a call for deep analysis of the testimony, the bulk testimony of those who have had these experiences. And I think if we want to understand NHI intent, you go to the point of the closest and most intimate impact on the individual. And that to me is that topic of experiencer abduction situations and incidents. So it's a big topic. We could spend the whole show on it, but I know there's more to get into.
Yeah, sure. No, but yeah, I definitely want to dig into this because again, this is something that I really haven't really examined or really jumped into in depth on the show. And, and I'm loving our discussion so far. Yeah. I'm curious, historically, people that report abduction experiences, was there a precursor to those events? In other words, without exception, would they always see or see some kind of UAP, months before or anything like that? Is there any sort of like precursor to an actual event occurring?
Well, a lot of people, yes, I would say there is that connection between UAP sightings and possibly close encounters on the ground, still at a distance, but still close, proximal, to potential close, intimate encounters in the form of abduction. Many abductees might say that the experience runs in the family. It's rarely just them. It's not got to, but it's often an uncle, an aunt, parent, sibling. I think for many, the experience begins sooner than they consciously can recall it beginning.
How soon?
It's hard to say. And I'm sure this is the other thing, is there may be multiple parallel abduction programs underway. And, I don't think we're dealing with only one attempt here. And I don't think at this point it's fair to write this off as, okay, they're just plucking a few humans for, observation. Look, the Griata Treaty in the 1950s, Eisenhower, they said they wouldn't do anything bad to the NHI. They made that claim, apparently, in that treaty. And, some might some have said later that the government went along with that, and in part to verify that the entities would not harm humans in that agreement to transact technology for access to the population. John Blitch, in his interview with Ross Coulthard, actually relays a conversation he had with a still acting defense director who basically relayed the true story as he understood it to be, which was one that, yes, we were required, our arms were bent to get involved for the purpose of verifying the claim that no humans would be harmed in the abduction experience, and therefore became complicit in that. Did they become also able to do their own form of abduction for their own purposes? Was that part of the technology or method transacted for? Possible, don't know. But I think there are multiple running abduction programs. So precursor experiences, some have surmised that there is some kind of antenna activation in the brain, the caudate putamen being one of those brain structures that might be involved in that. This rush, gold rush to psionic engagement with NHI, which I might pause people on, which is to say, A, we don't know the entities, B, we don't know the informational flow out and in, and C, a lot of that is connected or is a lot of that psionic activity is reported by abductees, unless you want to become one yourself. So you might want to pause before running to become telepathically activated for NHI communication. But yeah, I mean, these are some of the experiences that are reported. Yeah, again, big field and a lot of different experiences. I don't want to paint it as only one thing.
Right. And I heard Lou Elizondo say this once, that there's the whole like CE5 thing where apparently if you meditate or go through, get yourself into some kind of meditative state on a repetitive basis, that UAP will start showing up. And I'm probably oversimplifying this, but the question then becomes, are you playing with fire? Are you opening yourself up to something that you have no idea its intent or what it can do? And then secondly, is this a door like once you open, you can never shut?
Great questions. I mean, I think it's right in everyone's common sense. You understand a person before you become intimately engaged. Do you understand the entities who are present in this space? And even if you think you do, how can you verify or corroborate the claims that they might have made through a claimed communication of some sort? It's very difficult. So I think we need a whole societal step back. We need to bring out the experiences that have already occurred among millions of people, globally, potentially tens of millions of people, and talk about what is the characteristic profile of the experience or event. And then we need to query the entities societally and collectively regarding what they're here to do, what they have historically done, and provide or create the space for the devising of some kind of international coordination regarding how we engage with NHI, how we interact with technologies of non-Earth origin, et cetera. So without that, it's a free-for-all. It's the Wild West. And so in that context, I would say, yes, I would be very careful. I don't advocate a protocol for opening yourself up to NHI. I don't think it's a wise moment to do that. I don't think we know enough. And there are some pretty concerning signals, signs regarding what NHI have been active doing in our world. So, as for, the psionic, the psychic, I think these beings are probably highly telepathically activated. This may actually be how they speak, right? Mm-hmm. And, Lou Elizondo has surmised this might be a vestigial capability that was endemic in humanity before the advent of other forms of technology, society, language that might have overlaid some of these vestigial abilities for psychic communication. So these beings may operate in the psychic. It doesn't necessarily mean, some might say, oh, well, then they might be interdimensional or angelic, or they're not physical. I wouldn't rush to that. It's possible that they have devised technologies of mind that can traverse whatever barrier exists between I call it the phys-psi barrier, brain-blood barrier. It's like the phys-psi barrier that we can't ourselves yet cross readily. Well, they may have found ways to do so, either through technology or through mental development, psychic or neurological development. So we might be dealing with an entity capable of that. They might be hovering around looking for psychically receptive people. That might be seen as, for a variety of ends. But it's an entry point. And do you want to become an entry point, either for the species or for yourself? And to that point? Are you able to close those windows and doors once you find out that they're there? Most good psychics would counsel you to be very cautious becoming psychic. And I think the UFO community needs a good hard lesson from the world of trained professional psychic individuals at this point.
You know, because the thing that I always like think about, it's like, and again, I'm looking at this from like a human point of view, but it's like everybody wants something. Like, I want you to come on my show because I know you're going to be a great guest and you're going to impart information. You know, you might want to come on my show for something. Like every being wants something, be it food or a mate or you know, or whatever. So that leads me to believe, and again, we have no idea how these things things, but there must be some kind of benefit to NHI or whatever this higher intelligence is in contacting us. What do you think? And I know this is purely conjecture on your part. What do you think that their objective or objectives or reasons are? Is this contact mutual? Is it objective oriented versus they're just interested in seeing what we're doing?
Yeah. Well, you know, in my work, what I focus on doing is, you know, there's a number of kind of ways you can look at this. You can look at the big picture, the small picture, the intimate individual picture, the whole globe, whole world picture. You can look at it within the bounds of the United States or internationally. There's so many different ways to look at it. But there's 5 that really stand out to me. The first is first principles thinking from the ground up with these kind of unassailable truths that we can hang our hat on, brass tacks. We know that they're most likely true. And this kind of takes you, you know, to the 30-yard line, kind of takes you down the field, gets you a couple first downs. From first principles thinking, I think we need to look at behavior and activity. There is a wealth of information. You could even call it communication from a potential NHI about why they're here based on just their craft movements, their craft shape, their craft number, their interface with the oceans, their interest in certain locales, you know, coastlines, military sites, nuclear launch facilities, moments of nuclear testing, right? So there are indications there that can get you to the 40-yard line. And then maybe to the 50-yard line as well, there are some shifting patterns and trends in that historical record. SCU wrote a paper analyzing basically from a certain time period, it was the 40s to the 70s, looking at a subset of reported UAP encounters and noting any shifts in kind of daylight to nighttime, military to civilian focus, and also when society seemed to erupt on the topic of abductions, which interestingly happened pretty soon after the Betty Barney Hill abduction. So into the 70s, 80s, 90s, we see this preponderance of social processing at the media level of this presumed alien, right? So, I mean, there are indications there. Maybe that gets us to the 50-yard line. And I think what gets us into range of a field goal is really understanding the nature of the close encounter that has happened between individuals and a potential NHI. I think this is my assessment, and I'll put it out there. And I don't impress this upon people as it should be their conclusion. I say this is my assessment right now. I actually have a framework and a process to help get people to their own assessment, because in part what's not happening, we're stuck in this self-licking ice cream cone phenomenon, paralysis by analysis, which is more evidence, more evidence, more evidence. We don't even process the evidence we have. Yeah. We don't make a starting assessment that shapes new evidence collection, right? Yeah. And so we get nowhere. And then when that's unsatisfying, we back out of evidence collection and go into theorizing. I call it the possibility parade. Everyone goes around the block with their novel theory. And hooray, hooray, isn't ufology great? And the public looks at this like it's a clown show. This is a problem in the fundamental process of inquiry. You go from impossibility to possibility, possibility to probability, to starting assessment. And I think there are ways to get to an assessment. And then from there, working conclusion. And then ultimately, if you don't have a working conclusion, good luck pitching any policy move. A policymaker doesn't want to know your theory. They want to know with what confidence level you think X is true, right? And so we are not advancing in this process of inquiry, and we're shooting ourselves in the foot, I would say. And so, caveat, that's kind of a process I'm developing on the side. That's what my course is about, which we can talk about. But my assessment is that in the 20th century, we flashed the universe with an undeniable techno and bio signature of both life and destructive capability in the form of global conflict, nuclear power and nuclear destructive weaponry, and the ability to fundamentally alter, potentially on a essentially permanent timescale for the interests of any entity, the habitability of the Earth. Now, I think, if they're here for planet or people. And I would put resources under planet. There's not much else except dark matter. Like, why else would they be here? So planet or people. The Earth, first principles thinking, is a remarkable planet of biodiversity. It sits in a Goldilocks zone with a star system with gravitational forces that are amenable to the formation of life. This is less common than it is rare. So I'm sorry, Earth-like worlds are rare. Let's just say that. We know that. They're not everywhere. They're not in every solar system. So if we are putting off signals of intent and capability to destroy planet, resources, and people, I think that's a signal that got responded to. And I think that initiated a process of close observation, of analysis of the human species at all levels, both in terms of our species data set, which we have been leaking into space via radio transmission for decades, and by forced removal of human beings and examination, testing, and thorough analysis of all aspects of human, not just the way we function as an entity, but our entire societal construct, our belief structures, our origin stories, our faiths and religions. I think it has all been analyzed to the T, and it has been used to compute some form of engagement, programmatic engagement strategy with the human species. And that then initiated a process of not just remote observation, but incursion and involvement, or you could say intervention into human affairs. And I think that's the bleeding edge of the conversation is, are they in, are they out? Is this involvement or is this observation? If it's involvement, then is it commensurate with our human intent, meaning it runs 100% parallel with our intent? No concerns, no problems. Highly unlikely. Like, why would these aliens carry, our same intent, right? So they have a differing intent. Is it possible that is producing a form of intrusion or intervention? Very possible. And I know this is out on the speculative edge for many people, but I would just say this: we are looking at a world undergoing rapid change in ways that we can barely account for. Artificial intelligence, right? Bioengineering, even of the human genome, rapid destruction of Earth's biodiversity. The list goes on. I have a list of, I think, like 60 different flashpoints that are all points of instability in the world that could be engaged with by a non-human. And so many points of vulnerability, so many points of opportunity. And I think we need to ask the question, it's not, did NHI cause that to happen? That there's a causal link, or that there's an exclusive causal link. That would be way too far out there. But is there a connection via influence? Have they, via crash recovery, which I think is somewhat of a red herring, I think it's more like technological seeding myself. Has there been an attempt to seed technologies in the world that would influence our technological development? It's very possible. And as this whole convo about exotechnology comes out, we need to be asking that question. So to get back to your question, what is the scenario at play? Well, my assessment is on the spectrum of possibilities, there's a zone of probabilities, and the zone contains scenarios of transaction, of integration, or possibly some redirection of human species development. I think that is the zone in which we need to be focusing and ruling things out or ruling things in.
For sure. And I've kind of, I've had this thought for a while, but it's like, clearly they are significantly more advanced, at least technologically, maybe ethics-wise they are not, but they've been here likely as long, if not longer, than we have. So that makes me think, well, if they've been here this whole time, I would think they would have done all the sort of experiments or figuring out how we tick, all of that. But I would think that would have occurred long ago, and which leads me to really kind of go with your sort of hypothesis is that it's a how did you put it, where they're they're not here to watch. They are actually here to engage.
It's an in situation, an involvement, intervention, something of that kind. Well, to that point, I know, folks like to throw out these ready-made refrains. Well, if they wanted the world, they would have taken it already. If they wanted to destroy us, they would have done so already. And it's like, maybe they do want the world and they're taking it over a 1,000 year timescale.
Right.
I mean, come on, folks, think.
Yeah.
Maybe we are part of the resource, so they wouldn't destroy us in the act of, quote, taking. Think. There are no less than 100 possibilities in between these extremes of thought. And I think these are the cognitive barriers we throw up to say, no, it's got to be good, or no, humans are the problem, NHR aren't the problem. We don't know that. We really don't. They are fully unsubstantiated arguments. I think it's a great point that they've had all the time in the world, you could say. They've had billions of years to interface with Earth and human development over all of hominid development. Why didn't they do so earlier? That's possible that they did in some key ways. It's also very difficult to say that they who did it then are the ones who are here now. People love to say that. Oh, they've been here all along. It's like, how do you know that they, the ones 1,000 or 10,000, 100,000 years ago, are the ones here now? You don't, right?
Don't, yeah.
And so others could have had stopped in here a million years ago, taken some samples, put some genetic material into the human genome, and sped off. And we think that we're interfacing with those same entities today. That may not be the case. But I will say, I think humanity has reached a point of extreme utility for a potential highly technological species or set of species. If we're a world of warring tribes shooting bows and arrows, running around the jungle, there's not much you can do with that entity if you're a hyper advanced interstellar traveling space dwelling entity. But if you have a global system that can basically spread information, condition thinking, make more uniform the human experience via media, that can extract resources and bring those to marketplaces readily, this is highly usable. And it is possible that it is our infrastructure and our actual technological strides that make us an appealing partner to a potential visitor. Why would they want to partner with a primitive species? Right. And that might be why they didn't. They might have visited, but they didn't directly intervene. There wasn't much to intervene with. Whereas today, it's possible, AI, right? A super computational brain that can basically run the whole functions of the world and condition thought and so forth, that could plug in to some kind of exotechnology or exosystemic technological system that is highly appealing or attractive to a non-human intelligence. So these are possibilities.
You were talking earlier about kind of the self-licking ice cream cone, and people, of course, not really knowing what all this is, but they'll come to the conclusion of the example you gave of, oh, they've been here for a long time, this, that, and the other. We're sort of making these assumptions based on just kind of what we think could be the case. Do you think that overall there is a certain level of cognitive dissonance with the population, with policymakers? It's kind of a good example is there's a friend of mine who is a retired air traffic controller, and he believes that all of this is true. But the idea of it is so uncomfortable to him, he does not want to talk about it. He does not want to discuss it. How much is there of that kind of thinking do you think could be at play?
I think, a lot. I think there could be a lot of cognitive dissonance generated by any number of scenarios that might be at play. And in this case, we might be the top obfuscating entities in the picture ourselves, right? Our own thinking. There might be some kind of evolutionary handicap at play here where, I'm just surmising here. This is kind of, I like to go into these thought experiments where, maybe all species reach this point of technological ability to control their world, to condition their society, to ultimately destroy the habitability of their planet, right? And lo and behold, who shows up, right? Because that's what happens. Entities show up to intervene in that process. And yet the native species, they're divided, they're distracted, and they do not appear in the natives' paradigm. And so they struggle to perceive the visitor accurately. And they have all of these kind of like mental veils that impede clear vision as to what's going on. Even there are some accounts how native peoples seeing the tall ships off the coast, for the first time, they were literally unable to perceive the presence of the ship.
Wow.
Right? Some people would say it's right there. And they could not optically perceive it. Right? And there was some sort of neurofiltering going on that did not exist in their paradigm. Not to mention the fact of the projection of spiritual beliefs onto the visitors, being from the beyond, from the spirit world. So that also obfuscating their ability to see clearly. But yeah, I think we are at risk of massive societal ignorance of the phenomenon based upon some of these neural blockages that we have. And it's 100 years in, at least, and we have not mounted anything like a collective species response to this visitation. And we have allowed exotechnologies to get under the skin of human affairs, and for competing governments and defense entities to imbibe this tech and to weaponize it. And it's distorting the technosphere. It's distorting the social sphere. It could soon be distorting the economic sphere, trade war.
Sure.
Question mark, ... So, we just don't know how far the penetration has gone. And I think that's why, it's a real pause, step back, and we need a détente with NHI. Lester Nara was on my show, Emergent. He used that phrase. Perfect.
He's great.
Détente is a cessation of hostilities. And you could say hostilities. We're not hostile with the NHI. Oh, I would think again about that. There are indications of a very real underground hot war between at least the government of this country and with certain hostile elements of the NHI. They are trying to gain technological parity with them, and they have ever since the 1940s, developing technology to down these craft. And I'm sure there are other side benefits they're trying to attain by doing so. But we are in a kinetic engagement already with NHI, and we need a détente. We need a cessation of engagement. We need a remove and reset. NHI need to remove themselves from the human sphere, remove themselves psychically from society, from the potential influence they're having over society, and allow humanity the time to devise our rules of engagement, our ethics of contact, and a framework for our collective consensus-based interaction with non-human intelligence. And if they won't do that, that's not a good sign about them and their intent. If they will not allow that species space.
Do you think you spoke earlier about sort of cognitive dissonance and people not wanting to really engage or really dig into this aspect of the phenomena. Do you think that, and as far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, the fact that there isn't any sort of photographic evidence or any significant visual evidence, I hear of like marks on people's bodies versus like, we have radar data of these things flying around. We have photographs. How much of this sort of data deficit, hard data deficit, plays into a sort of, maybe not skepticism per se, but of like, well, maybe this is just in people's heads. How much does that figure into that, do you think?
I think it figures a lot in, and I wouldn't be surprised if the call for hard proof is one of the tactics of the disinformation campaign itself, because guess who has the proof? The agents of the disinformation campaign.
Right.
The three-letter agencies, the defense entities. So if they're the ones seeding into the media or into the public consciousness, well, show us the proof. They're essentially saying, show them what we possess that we will not allow out.
Right.
And I put the NHI on the hook here too. I mean, there are indications across the whole sweep of history of the intent to evade detection, to cloak themselves, to not be seen by government, authority, military, craft, etc. There is an intent to operate in secrecy. So, they are not indemnified either of this, dearth of evidence. Maybe they're very good at covering up their tracks. Go figure. I would imagine that would be a capability that they would have if they want to shape the way society and the human species perceives them. So, the call for hard evidence it is kind of a soft argument in the sense that hard evidence has been collected with those that have all of the multi-sensor equipment and the data collection tools and the mechanisms of power and the monopoly on violence and force to basically control that information and keep it away from the public. So, and also inherent in that, there's kind of an A-B to this, which is it's a call for hard evidence and it's a dismissal of human testimony.
Yeah.
Which I find very interesting. Just a vast blanket dismissal. There's no interest in talking to anyone who claims to have had an experience in the mainstream, in the world of psychology. Why is that? That's very interesting, right? It's not just this, it's also not that. And I think these are major flags. So in my view, there's a dynamic shift we need. We need to be asking the right questions. And the right question is not, are UAP real? The right question is, are they intelligently piloted? Are they coming in close contact with human beings? Are they interacting physically with human beings? Are they taking human beings from one location to another? Now, if that's your question, go get the data to prove that hypothesis.
Right.
And now we're cooking with butter, right? Now we're getting somewhere. And that data is potentially obtainable. I mean, there could be a viable medical device that tracks whether a person is physically removed from their home. Has anyone sought to bring that forward? Right? Not to my knowledge. That's a problem. So anyway, we can get into the deep dive on strategies, but yeah, I think the tactics of obfuscation would love us to believe that only more evidence can demonstrate any veracity to this, and that we cannot assess the phenomenon without it, which I disagree with.
I completely agree. And I'm glad you brought this up, because I actually responded to a tweet, and I'm going to read this to you a little over 24 hours ago. So, of course, everyone knows we have the UFO debunker. I call him a professional debunker because I don't think he's doing it just for the fun of it, Mick West. But there's also this very, very well-known skeptic who has written tons of books and does talks and has a nonprofit, a gentleman by the name of Michael Shermer. And folks that I have spoken with that have interacted with him have actually said he is very respectful. And I personally have never had any interaction with him. But he posted yesterday, and here's this tweet: 1,000 episodes in the can, a few thoughts on what I've learned about the search for the truth after 500 episodes of my podcast and 33 episodes of publishing Skeptic, a magazine. This guy publishes a skeptical magazine, same as Center for Inquiry, which Mick West often writes for. Thank you for all your support. And again, this is from Michael Shermer, the founder and publisher of this of Skeptic.com, and of course he has his own podcast. So this was my reply to him yesterday. I said respectfully, and again, he referred to this sort of a North Star. And I said respectfully, this is again to Michael Shermer on X, I said respectfully, the skeptic's North Star is simple. It's arrogance. Nowhere is this more apparent than how skeptics and debunkers treat the UAP phenomenon. When skeptics claim that they are better observers than highly trained pilots operating our nation's most advanced military aircraft, that's arrogance. When they insist that lawmakers on the Senate Intelligence and Armed Services Committees are being duped by mere UFO enthusiasts, that's arrogance. When skeptics like Mick West declare that a former director of national intelligence isn't qualified to comment on UAP, that's arrogance. When they run multi-million-dollar nonprofits to push their worldview while profiting from books and lectures, that's arrogance. When they support organizations like the Guerrilla Skeptics of Wikipedia, which exist solely to tear down the credibility of anyone who doesn't march in lockstep with their worldview, that's arrogance. And when they make snarky statements, which this Michael Shermer did, when they make snarky statements like, quote, the second shooter of Kennedy was an alien, mocking serious discussions with dismissive rhetoric, that's arrogance. And then finally, the point I wanted to drive home, when they tell millions of people around the world that they didn't see what they saw, didn't experience what they experienced, that stripping them of their credibility, attacking the very core of human perception. It's not just arrogance, it's wrong, it's un-American, it's gaslighting, it's propaganda. And that is my personal view on
Well said.
What these people do, this kind of a tearing down of folks that people like Mick West and Michael Shermer and Stephen Greenstreet, that they do. I'm blanking on the guy's name, but the very famous debunker from the 50s and 60s, he was very rude about it and very over the top, and would go and dig up and see if they had arrest records and whatnot. In my view, these debunkers are doing the exact same thing. They're just doing it with a smile on their face and with proper British manners. But still, at the end of the day, they are saying to people, you don't know, what you saw is not what you think. We know what you saw. It
Yeah.
gets me really wound up and angry,
Mm-hmm.
because then you have to ask yourself, well, what kind of mental impact does that have on people's psyche? People that are already struggling with what they saw or what they experienced, or being taken from their bedrooms. And then to have these people like Mick West, like Michael Shermer, like Stephen Greenstreet say, you know what? Maybe you have a screw loose. It's not what you think. How
Yeah.
how inhumane is that?
Highly, highly. And, I think back to when society came to realize that childhood sexual abuse was a thing.
Yeah,
Leading up to that, there was massive denial of that. It was all sorts of psychological, internal workings of the child's brain that was messing with memory and causing false memory and in the end, it was a massive problematic phenomenon in society. Think of the people who got gaslit for years before that was acknowledged.
right.
We will eventually acknowledge that this has happened. It might be too late. We might not be the same humanity that we are, I would say.
Yeah,
So, but to tell people that they have not experienced what they have in their conscious recollection. I talked to an abductee 3 days ago. He remembers consciously. There's never been hypnosis done with him. He remembers incidents in his teens and 20s of, I won't get into it, but of the real deal, the real abduction experience happening in essentially broad daylight in his mind. And it was tremendously harmful to him and has been to this day. Okay, so even if that didn't happen, something happened. What happened? Are you
right.
interested to know if people's lives are being destroyed or fundamentally altered by a negative, non-consensual contact experience? Maybe it's with a human, maybe it's with the military, who knows? But aren't you interested to know or no? And if you're not interested to know, right, then you are a debunker.
Yeah,
I mean, a skeptic, feel free to be skeptical, that's
of
fine.
course.
But if you're a debunker, right, you're not even open to asking the question.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I replied to a tweet to Mick West. I essentially said, you're not a scientist. At best, you are a lazy researcher. It's funny, these folks, they don't, with the drone stuff. I asked Mick West on a tweet. I said, have you reached out to any government official or law enforcement official to ask them what is going on? And his reply was, can you recommend any? I mean, it's that kind of like snarky,
Right.
just sickening arrogance. And, and you ask these folks, well, why are they doing it? Or you ask Mick that, and he's like, oh, I'm doing it for fun. It's like, that is the biggest load of shit I've ever heard. If I'm not going to spend my valuable time left on Earth investing it in something that I don't believe in. It just makes no sense.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I mean,
please.
part of how I treat it is that they don't matter.
They
don't
don't,
matter.
no.
Go talk to the people. I talk to people about the UFO phenomenon all day, every day, all the time. It's one of my things. Is I call it the UFO conversation, and I view it as a form of citizen disclosure, which is I know some things, or at least I know some questions to ask. I'm going to go ask people those questions, and people are phenomenally open, right? And so these debunkers, they have much less influence than we think. They might want us to think they have more than they do, and get us in a tussle, a dynamic engagement that we can't get out of. So I would say walk around them and go talk to the people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I kind of take a little bit of a different view. I think mainly when I see the disinformation operation being run with Wikipedia, the guerrilla skeptics.
Yes.
I think they do
Well,
have some impact.
You've done very important coverage on that, Matt, that we've all benefited from. So your gloves off, and I do appreciate that. Someone's got to be.
Well, and it's really Rob Heatherly is the one that dug all of that up. But let's shift gears, go back to NHI and sort of their intent, what they're up to. If they may not be interested in respectful contact with humanity, how can we protect ourselves from harm? Experiencers, often categorize their NHI encounters as either positive, or in other words, or negative. But in other words,
Right.
As kind of like, their sort of experience. And, is it a Stockholm syndrome, et cetera? But how how will we ever tackle the negative aspects of NHI contact going forward?
Sure.
Is it through support groups? How do we deal with this as a species?
Yeah, great question, and a whole world of discussions. I love to get into this. So, I think we need broad societal recognition that unidentified anomalous phenomena or craft are operating in our world. So, we need disclosure of UAP. Somebody needs to break that glass. It's my hope that that can happen in the next year or two, because if it does, it opens up the enormous discussion. Well, who pilots them, right? Who's behind the wheel? Let's go from craft to controller. And where do they tend to go in the world? Why are they interested in certain cities and not others, certain coastlines and not others, right? And so now we can begin a broad societal down selection of anomalous phenomena, which, my God, everything's anomalous phenomena, right? I have a toddler. He looks like an unidentified anomalous phenomena to
Right.
me most days. To the real hard physical craft, transits, incursions, interactions that may be occurring. So there's an important societal awareness and then down selection to core reality. With that, I think there are a number of things we can do. First, we need citizen tracking of UAP. And there are a number of great people with great technologies and companies in the space pushing for this to enable society with the tools to track UAP, either to corroborate government claims, which may or may not be accurate, NHI claims, which may or may not be accurate, but also to put the toolkit in the citizen hands to understand what's hovering above their home at night. So I think we need that. That alone, more eyes on the sky and more multi-sensor data collection in the public domain, could change the operating conditions for this potential hostile NHI in ways that change the abduction phenomenon. Gosh, who knew, right?
Sure.
Don't allow them 100% free movement. Let there be some implications for them for transiting, the United States or Milwaukee, or going from country to country, national borders, and maybe they don't do it as much. So I think societal awareness is going to change those conditions. I think we need a very serious conversation at the policy level regarding human rights, crimes against humanity. Do these apply to non-humans? Are we going to apply human law to these potential entities? And if so, we need to then go about engaging in significant research and analysis into what is the encounter that's taking place, what is its characteristic profile, how can we step in, how can law enforcement or safety professionals step in to impede the procedure that might be taking place to protect the public, which is their job to do. And then at a kind of a whole world level, we need to take this international and fast. We need to reframe disclosure as a US-centric, defense-centric, national security-centric event to an interest of humanity and a problem of world security, I feel. And by doing so, that's going to change the operating conditions tremendously, because there are indications that, we didn't get into this, but this is the deep of the phenomenon. This is beyond what we can really perceive, but what we can infer exists based on the mass of the iceberg itself, that there are multiple encounters and engagements occurring with different foreign actors right now. So
What do you
there
mean
are
foreign
indications,
actors?
well, China, Russia, state
Okay.
powers. So it's not like, there are X number of NHI interacting with all governments all at once, right? Commensurate levels. I think there is a bit of a divide and conquer phenomenon going on where certain entities are partnering with certain human state actors, and that could cause massive destabilization of the world via competition for technology or any number of prosaic competitive platforms, Russia, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, semiconductors, exotech, whatever. So we need to basically enforce this détente and begin to talk internationally about how to regulate the interface with NHI. So I think that's important. So, you go from kind of the citizen level to the government level, disclosure to the international level, but then I know there is the individual who's having the experience, and that's its own 2 hour long conversation, is what can an individual do to stop these experiences, to protect their body and mind, to close those psychic doors if they exist, if they want to. And, interesting conversation. We can go deeper if you want, but there
Yeah,
are ways,
let's.
I would say.
Yeah, no, let's, because that is something that I have often wondered. It's like, well, what is there something that we can do? I've heard some people say that that there's a permissive element to it? Like if you allow it in, or if you say you're not welcome here, it'll go away, which I don't think I necessarily believe. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, great topic. So in my experience, and this is from my experience, this is not just what I think, there is an intent to undertake some kind of psychic surveillance on an individual of promise. So when an individual is identified as a target, it is a psychic engagement initially. There are ways to impede that psychic engagement, to effectively engage in mental shielding. That's what I would call it. And also the exertion of psychic force and the effective creation of a psychic sovereign boundary around you. I know that sounds way speculative and kind of maybe woo for some people. That's fine. Find yourself under direct psychic incursion at this level by this kind of entity with the technological power they have, you'll be scrambling for strategies yourself. But in my experience, there are ways to create a barrier. And, I think the induction of prayer and powerful belief, higher powers, people talk about, invoking the name of a spiritual founder, a religious teacher, or the divine as being highly effective. I'm not at all surprised by that. And so I think there's more in this universe than just body on body, right? I do think that there is a non-human, non-physical layer to life. And you could call that non-corporeal, you could call that, spiritual entities, angelic entities, what have you, whatever you want to call it. But it's not just body on body on this playing field. So, it is possible to invoke protection, I would say. And, try it out, see if it works for you. But even at the individual level, there are ways to make yourself a bad subject. And you should. Somebody put out on Twitter, very annoyingly, with a mantid alien in an abduction scenario, would you keep your calm? As if you should keep your calm. Come on, just calm down. And I retweeted that saying, should you keep your calm? Because no, you shouldn't. You should resist. You should psychically resist. You should become aware of them, and you should make them aware that you're aware. That's the NHI don't want disclosure. I'll just make that point. As we go forward, see who wants disclosure and who doesn't, because we need it. To my understanding, the entities in our space physically engaging in these ways, they do not want disclosure. Disclose them to themselves right in the act of engagement, right?
Wow. Yeah.
These entities, they may want us to think that they're powerful, that they are numerically superior, that we are helpless to resist. In fact, they could be highly adept in the psychic space. They're highly technological too, but they are numerically inferior, right? They do not control the ground, let alone the air. We have way more capability we have to assert our sovereignty and to create a scenario for safe contact, which is what I advocate, than we think we do. We're just in this unwitting recipient position where we take whatever's given. That's not necessary. And I think at an individual and broad global level, we need to begin emitting the signal of our human intent. We need to be saying to the universe, this is who we are, this is our world, this is our house. Those who want to enter our house have to abide by the following rules and common standards of consensual, safe contact, but we're not yet doing that. And so again, it's this Wild West scenario, and I think it would be a lot easier than we think to change the operating conditions and affect a beneficial outcome for a lot of people as a result.
Well, and it's hard to do that if the general populace is not aware that this exists.
Right.
Kind of the going back to the argument of like, well, should people be told about this? Does it invite anything in? But kind of the analogy that I can think of is if you are in your neighborhood, let's say there is some serial burglar breaking into homes in the middle of the night, you would want the mayor, the chief of police to tell the entire town so that they can protect themselves, or at least they are aware of the threat. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, but if they are completely oblivious to it, then they are completely vulnerable to it. There is no way of having any sort of countermeasures. So yeah, I mean, if folks need to be told about this stuff.
Right.
Yeah, it makes no sense in a way, keeping them in the dark.
Right. I totally agree. And I think people do. In my experience, when I talk to people about this, which you have to do carefully and progressively. You can't just tell them everything you know. They're able to deal with it. People can handle the prospect of alien life universally. I say this across national boundaries, ethnic boundaries, religious, cultural, etc. I've been all over the world. I've talked to people about this. People can handle it. So I think there are forces at play that don't want people to know, and they would want to argue the fact that people can't handle it. Let's test that theory. But yes, I think we are in a new environment. It's not that everyone out there is bad, right? Nor is
Sure.
it necessarily that everyone that here is bad. But we have to really be grounded in our logical assessment of who's here and what they're doing, and understand we're on a new playing field. We have to learn how to lock our psychic doors and windows. That's
Sure.
part of the requirement for functioning in this new environment of sentient engagement, which with a sentience that is telepathic and with a humanity that is telepathic. So
Right.
it's not to be, people shouldn't be too scared of that. It's just kind of like brushing your teeth and learning how to drive a car down the road. Like this is the new kind of hygiene of humanity as it interfaces in this new exosystem of life. But yeah, I think people do need to know. And if there is an intruder in the house, collectively or personally, you take matters into your own hands to effectively secure your space. And there are ways to do that.
That makes sense. I want to throw out kind of maybe a sort of counter argument to my point earlier. And I brought this up. I had a conversation with Christopher Mellon, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, and I was. This was actually at the very first Seoul conference, and you may or may not, or viewers at home may or may not be aware of my experience with this, but. I had never had anything happen my entire life. No memory of anything, seeing anything strange in the sky. And I had decided I'd been writing some op-eds, and I'd written some op-eds on U.S. and Russian nuclear policy. And I knew that there were some senators that had been writing legislation regarding UAP. And I, through some political connections, was introduced to a senator's chief of staff, and I said, hey, I want to write an op-ed about legislation being written on UAP. This chief of staff then set up a call, and it was myself and the senator's two national security staffers and their comms person. And when this call was set up, I literally thought the question would be, okay, what are you going to write about? Where are you pitching the article to, et cetera? And first thing they said, this is all off the record. And I said, yes, of course. And then they said, okay, what do you want to know? And I was just completely, I wasn't prepared. I didn't have any questions or anything like that. And I just blurted out, are UFOs real? And it turned into this 30-minute conversation where these Senate staffers from this very powerful senator said, yes, it's real. It's not from China. It's not from Russia. It's a national security concern. We see these things coming in and out of our atmosphere from our space-based assets. They got a little bit cagey when they brought that up. They didn't want to go into details. And the one thing that really stuck out at the end of the call, and it wasn't a video call, it was on Zoom Voice, is one of the staffers said, our entire life we may never understand where all of this is from. So that happens, and I'm literally in a kind of state of shock, because I think it's one thing for people on Twitter or whatever to tell you this stuff's real. It's another thing when the intel and armed services staffer of the senator's office tell you, yeah, this is real. It's not made up. And anyway, it was.
Matt, I've had some of those some similar interactions, and people have relayed interactions like that with me. And I think I can say that the abduction phenomenon and a potential hybridization phenomenon are known of in the U.S. government, and it is acknowledged as a massive problem.
Well, so and what happened here, and this is kind of in a long-winded way getting to this, but a couple days later, we started having paranormal stuff happen in the house. And it started with a baby gate getting pushed over in the kitchen. We woke up at 6 a.m. thinking someone was breaking into the house. And we had this baby gate just leaned up against the cabinet on the kitchen floor. And we looked at a security camera that we had in there, and it looked like somebody literally had just pushed the thing over with their finger.
Wow.
And then about, I think it was 3 to 5 days later, my spouse and I are outside, and this orb of light, probably about the size of like a Mini Cooper, appeared above the house. And there was the paranormal stuff continued. We had banging on the walls and voices, and that lasted for about 4 to 6 months. The orb, there was never more than one. The orb showed up on about a monthly basis. I think in total there have been
Matt, when was this for you? Was that recent?
This was about 3 years ago. This is right when I got into this. So the question I had was, my whole adult life, I had never had any of this occur, nothing. And then all of a sudden I engage, I have this conversation with this senator's staff, and then poof, it turns on. And so my question to Mellon, I said, let's just say that the reason it began manifesting in my home and above my home was because I had an awareness. I was told by congressional officials that this was real. If that plays into it, if the president gets in front of the podium and says to the entire nation, this is real, does that mean that this could possibly start manifesting above the homes of millions of Americans? And then what kind of panic could come out of that? Which would maybe say, well, maybe there's a reason they're not telling people about this, because if there is an overall global awareness or an epiphany, that NHI is just going to start appearing everywhere. Any thoughts on that? I know it's been a bit long-winded there.
No worries. Wake up call. They're already appearing over millions of people's homes. So we're already there. They're already operating with free reign in the world. I've had similar conversations like that. I've experienced some similar things as you have, and I know others have as well. I am aware that retaliation is a major feature of becoming aware of the phenomenon at certain levels. And, powers that be want to nip it in the bud. I would say the moment people begin to network, people who have influence, who have the ability to cause policy action on this topic, begin to become networked, connected, and organized, there are retaliatory steps taken. I won't get too deep into that. I've heard things shared with me. I've seen some things firsthand. I am aware people have been killed because of this issue. And what does that tell you, right? Nothing to see here? Oh, I don't think so. Yeah. Something massive to see here. And so, it's not just what they don't want us to know, it's what they do want us to know, in the sense of, they want to both tell a story that's not true, but also suppress the telling of a story that is true. It goes both ways. I have heard people in government highly concerned about NHI retaliation, like on a broad scale. And I would challenge that fear. I worry about this 2027, 2036 imminent NHI craft, coming to harm defense contractors, et cetera. There could easily be scare tactics at work. There could be intimidation just at the narrative level. And, that society is about to imminently make contact when it's already been in contact, deep, intimate contact. That to me is a flag. But I know people in government are worried about mass reveal, retaliation, this whole thing of people becoming open to the phenomenon, and therefore maybe a demonic force enacts its effect on them. There's a lot of fear in the space. And I think some of that fear these are part of the barriers that have been thrown up to keep people from analyzing the phenomenon at hand. So we have to push through those. We have to push through the assumptions, those barriers of fear. And I don't think the public becoming suddenly aware of UAP or even NHI is going to cause a mass appearance over everyone's house. I wouldn't be surprised if the NHI don't try to preempt that, not necessarily with a mass reveal, but by provoking some kind of prosaic conflict that steals the news and becomes news of the day and makes UAP a non-news event. So I think there is hazard in disclosing. I do think that, but I think those who are first on the scene, if you want to be on the frontier scouting, you have to take some hits and suffer some of these effects based on just becoming aware of the phenomenon And anyone who's going to become a forerunner for the cause, I think, has gone through some degree of this.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's going to stop all of a sudden.
Yeah. That makes sense. Do you think that there's any benefit to humanity with interacting with NHI?
Huge. I mean, I'm personally pro contact, 100%. I think this is the greatest realization in human history. I think it has the power, if we choose to engage with it in this way, of resolving our longstanding human conflicts, and really providing what Jake Barber aptly called ontological relief. Love that.
Yeah.
I think that's a powerful effect that we need, given what we're facing. I just think we have to think long and short. Long game, absolutely. We're entering a period of potential human interaction in an ecosystem of life. Short game, we have to deal with what's here, and it may not be what we want it to be. And so I think there's multiple stages to that. But the power of this event at all levels, even spiritually and religiously, huge. And I think a lot of people, this is just what I sense, is a lot of people have a nature that's kind of calibrated to a bigger picture of life. They're not just bounded in the human, script. They're entities of a bigger landscape.
Sure.
And with no acknowledgement of this, they suffer with this kind of discontinuity in the context of human society. And so anxiety, depression, etc. I imagine as people wake up to this, some of that's going to be relieved, and people are going to wake up and go, this is who and what I am. This is who and what we are. I want to be a participant now in a world undergoing engagement with the ecosystem of life. I also hope people sober up and become serious about sussing through the real implications of the entities that are here as well.
I couldn't agree more. Now, tell us about your 4-week course called Decoding Alien Intent. What is that?
So earlier in 2024, the New Paradigm Institute staff there at the time asked me to share what I know, which I took that as a wonderful blank check to teach a course on ways that citizens can decode the intent of the entities that are here in our citizen space. Because, if you listen to me more, you'll find out real quick. I'm about empowering people. I think the NHI are more interested in people and government. I think the people hold the greater record of NHI interaction than the government does. And I think it's a bit of a misdirection to think that we need to go all government for disclosure when the people are key parts of that disclosure. So I wanted to put the tools for decoding intent in people's hands. They contain in the course, 4-part course, 8 hours of lectures, great, fun to deliver, fun to develop and teach. And basically I provide an 80-year survey of the phenomenon. I introduce a framework and a logical cognitive process to decode the nature of the phenomenon for oneself. And then I introduce some kind of anecdotal ways and analytical methods for going a bit deeper and really sussing out the scenarios at play. So you can go to my website. Unfortunately, I think something happened with NPI recently, and they have forked away from their former educational program. So I'm not sure the course may not suddenly be available. So I will look at rehosting that on my site. I've also developed it into a 3-hour lecture, which I gave to Arizona MUFON a few months back. So I'll look forward to getting that out as well. But basically, this is about not what to think, but how to think. These are key insights and key information to consider as you think. And then I like to give my assessment and working conclusion so that some people have something to square theirs up against as they undertake that process.
And you have a new show called Emergent, new podcast. Tell us about that and how folks can find it.
reedsummers.com/emergent. /podcast. I realized that there was a need for some kind of platform by which we can talk about the emergent, meaning the unpredictable new nature of the outcome of humanity interacting with NHI. And so on the show Emergent, it's bi-weekly, Fridays, 7 o'clock Mountain, 9 o'clock Eastern. It's me sometimes solo, and I also have wonderful guests on the show. And basically, we walk around the issue of non-human intelligence and the reality of contact as it's manifesting in the world, looking at technology, governance, the international landscape, society, culture, media. How is the human collective brain interpreting and processing the awakening of the fact that NHI are interacting with humanity? And so that was the inspiration for the show. and also to bring caution and logic and a really grounded approach, which I see lacking in the community generally. There's a lot of leaping to hopeful beliefs,
Sure.
or a lot of resistance with fear, or maybe a heavily religious lens. And so I think we're abandoning our core capabilities if we go either of those two routes. So I wanted to give that to people.
Do you think that disclosure by the government, especially with what they're talking about with this new committee and whatnot, do you think that this is inevitable? Do you think that within the time period of this administration that we are going to see acknowledgement, disclosure, however you want to call it?
I wouldn't say it's inevitable. I would say it's probable. I think there's enough in motion now that can't be stopped. I don't know how accurate or complete the nature of the disclosure will be, and that's why I think there are key steps. We can't just assume that the administration will get this right. We have to be active, citizen level, inputting to this the way it happens. I think the UAP Disclosure Act is still key, and I know the UAP Disclosure Fund is active on that front, as are UMAT, which is great. The Senate Select Committee, the proposal to stand that up, key. I also think this proposed senior advisor on UAP to the president, or the UAP czar as it's called, is also very key. And if I were to cast my vote today, you mentioned him at the beginning of the show, David Grush. He's the one who opened this up in good faith, put himself on the line, and has demonstrated that he has a complete knowledge enough to guide the administration as they undertake, whether it's an executive order or new declassification efforts like we saw through Congresswoman Luna, the announcement through the House Oversight Committee. So we need to have strong leadership in place, and we can't assume that the administration, being that they may not know what they're looking at here.
Right.
I know there's conjecture that President Trump and his close inner circle have been, quote, told, but what have they been told? And how are they interpreting what they've been told? There are people, highly credible, well-credentialed in the space, who can help guide this effort. So I hope they get in. But I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful. I think, though, as this rolls, we can't just trust that it will be an accurate rollout. We have to be engaged in the process. The citizens have to be decoding NHI intent. They have to be detecting UAP. They have to be engaged in their own cognitive process that grounds them in their experience and in their own instinct and logic. And if that's happening, I think it lowers the pain threshold for government. Because, apparently a big obstacle to government disclosure is the ill preparedness of society.
Right.
So if society can begin to get prepared now, at the citizen level, at the religious level as well, I think that lowers that pain threshold, and it increases the likelihood of this getting past the gatekeepers and wide out into the public, where we can begin to suss through it.
Absolutely. Well, Reed, thank you so much for joining us. I would absolutely love to have you back on the show. This has just been, I've learned so much. And as I always say, kind of my knowledge on this whole topic is a bit like a piece of Swiss cheese with a bunch of holes in it, but especially this aspect of the phenomenon. And I agree. We are past due for having some serious conversations about this, because it doesn't affect us as a nation, or not only a nation, but just us as a species. And we have to confront this head on. We really do, and we can't do it until we have honest and open communication and information from our government and on all fronts.
Yes, thank you, Matt. Great conversation, and I would love to be back. And as we go from UAP to NHI and humanity begins to wake up to that fact, there's going to be so many conversations to have on every level. So just the beginning.
Absolutely. All right, Reed, thanks for joining us. And we look forward. We'll put a link to your podcast and your website. Folks, look up his excellent show, and look forward to having you back. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Matt. Take care.
Folks, if you enjoyed our interview with Reed Summers, we would appreciate it if you would hit the subscribe and thumbs up buttons on YouTube. And of course, always leave a comment. Please tell your friends about us on social media. This helps us grow our channel. And remember, it's our human right to demand the truth on UAP.